Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just pulling up my webcam now. My name is Andy Chamberlain. I am the Director of Policy at IPSE, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar. And you should be able to see me and my co-presenter, Ryan. And also our very special guest today, we're joined by the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Small Business, Consumers and the Labour Market, Paul Scully. Hi, Paul.
Hi there, how are you?
Very good, thank you. So thanks very much for joining us today. And I think we've got you for the next 40 minutes or so. Being very generous with the time, thank you. And we've had so many questions in advance of this, and it's a very well-attended webinar. Just before we get into those questions, I just want to tell the attendees that you should be able to see us, see some slides, and hear us as well. And if you could just let us know in the questions box that you can see and hear everything okay, that would be very reassuring, because we're all doing this from remote locations, of course, and we've been doing these every week for a while now, and we haven't had any problems so far, but I'm always conscious that, you know, to me, this is all just magic, that this seems to work every week, but it's always reassuring to know that you're out there and that you can hear us. Okay, so while you're doing that, I'm going to move things along with our first question for Paul, and it's all about limited company directors. Essentially, they have been largely excluded from the schemes which the government have set up during the coronavirus. So the job retention scheme, or the coronavirus job retention scheme as it's known, is largely for employees, as we know, and company directors can make use of it. They can furlough themselves from their own company, but they can only make use of it on the salary portion of their pay, not dividend. And the government say that this is a big problem. Now, Paul, I know that you've asked for some ideas on this, and IPSE have sent you some ideas. What are the ideas that you've heard about what more can be done to either include them in the current schemes that we have or set up some other scheme to help them? And have you had any conversations with Treasury about that?
Well, you're right. Look, the priority from the government has clearly to be to help as many people as they can in good time. Frankly, there've been a lot of schemes, whether it's income like this, whether it's grants, the loans, that have been put in place that we've had to deliver at scale and at speed. Never been done before. And on the whole, they've been welcomed as generous and flexible, but I understand people's concerns. I have paid myself paying dividends in the past, and so I totally empathise with this situation. And as the small business minister, I wanted to make sure that I'm listening. Now, the self-employed income support scheme uses information that the HMRC already holds. It's based on tax returns, whereas the job retention scheme that you talked about, where you can furlough yourself as a director from the salary point of your part of your income, the spine of that is PAYE. And so by having these spines, as I've described them, it makes it easier to deliver. But under current reporting mechanisms, it's not possible for HMRC to distinguish between dividends derived from someone's own company, from other sources, or whether the dividends are, as they're intended to be, investment income, or they're in lieu of employment income. And so if you start to expand that, it requires HMRC to start collecting and verifying new information, which will take longer to deliver and put at risk the other schemes, purely in terms of resource. And so you're right, IPSE submitted alternatives. Mike Clancy from Prospect Union, I know, has had conversation. I've spoken to him, as I have the other unions, and he's spoken directly to Treasury. So whether there can be things that are accountant certified, or whether there could be retrospective checks and all of these kind of things. The predominant view, at the start of the process was that it's a balance between resource, are there other alternatives for directors, and how we can respond to that, which is a difficult choice to make, because what we're trying to do is to retain jobs. We're trying to protect businesses and livelihoods. So I do understand the concern, but as I say, the Treasury's always remained flexible within all of the other schemes, with all of the schemes that we've had. But that's really where we are at this moment in time.
I mean, this was raised yesterday by Mel Stride at the liaison committee directly to the PM. I don't know if you saw that one. He said to the Prime Minister, look, one group that has largely missed out here are company directors, and could you do anything? And the PM said something which I tweeted afterwards, which made me feel slightly hopeful that this might get looked at again. He said, look, I'll have a word with Rishi Sunak about it. I don't know if you saw that, and if you thought that perhaps the Prime Minister might take this on and maybe raise it up a notch or two.
Well, I think we'll see what happens. I know there was some discussion in that when Mel was talking, and some people have raised with me that it was the idea that they're feeling because you haven't paid as much tax, because it does reduce your national insurance slightly, that puts them as second-class citizens, and that's not the case. That's not the thinking behind it. Behind the difference in the schemes, it very much is a resource-intensive case that has stopped a simple scheme coming forward to helping the by best estimate that I've seen is 750,000 people that may be within this. So we'll see what happens with the from the Prime Minister's words. As I say, there's no principled stance. It is very much a how can we deliver something at speed and at scale. There is a number of other support schemes available to directors of such companies, and I would ask you to go to the gov.uk website and look at the business support finder tool that's on there, which allows you to put answer a few simple questions, and it will direct you to various other parts of the scheme, which I know are clearly within all of this. What we try to do is, I know there are a number of people falling between the cracks. We try to minimise that for the reasons that I've said.
No, I appreciate that, and we had Ed Davey actually on the webinar last week, and he said something similar, which was, look, when the schemes were being set up, he said he was prepared to accept there was a genuine focus on, we've got to set up these schemes, they're brand new, it's difficult to deliver that sort of thing in a short space of time, so we're going to sort of keep it kind of closed down as simple as possible. Now, credit where credit's due to the government and to HMRC, and I spent enough time giving them a hard time, I must give them some credit here. They've set up these schemes, I'm particularly thinking of the job retention scheme and the SAYE scheme, and they've worked well, and they've done it ahead of time in the case of the SAYE scheme. But now that they've done that, and those schemes do work, is there not some scope now, a little bit of slack, where they could maybe look at, okay, what about some of these other groups? What about this difficult thing around dividends? Perhaps there's something that we can do. I mean, I know you've already answered the question a bit, but I suppose I'm just wondering whether you feel like there is something that could be done in that space, and that it might happen again, or whether we should just say that's it, and what we've got is what we've got.
No, look, it is difficult. It is complicated. I know, as I say, I paid myself through this, on that sort of structure myself, and it wasn't about reducing tax. Clearly, it did a little bit with the employer's national insurance, but it was mainly because I was setting up a new limited company. My business partner and I at the time, it wasn't worth us setting up a payroll until we took on our first employee, because then we could pay ourselves what we needed to pay ourselves rather than taking money out of the business. Because RTI means that you're on a conveyor belt, frankly, when you start PAYE, and so it does add bureaucracy. It takes money out of business just at a time when we just simply didn't have any. So we're having enough to put food on our table. That was my rationale, and other people will do it for different reasons, for their own personal reasons. But so that's where we were. You've looked at other schemes where we've had to adapt. So the grant scheme, for example, that we have for small businesses, we've actually added another layer onto that in terms of the discretionary grant. There's an extra £617 million that's gone to that, because that's seemingly easy. If you think about the grant scheme, that is simply, do you have a business that's paying business rates? You may either qualify for 10 grand, or you may either qualify for 25 grand if you're in hospitality and retail. That would be about as easy as you can get, you'd think. However, I'm still on local radio this morning trying to get businesses that are eligible to claim £2 billion that's left unclaimed by businesses that should be entitled to it, because they've either not heard about it, they believe it's a loan rather than a grant, whatever reason. And so even the most simple sounding schemes have huge amounts of complication when you look at the back office behind it. And so I know there are still lots of conversations going on, whether it's you guys, Prospect Union and other unions. As I said, I've raised this issue, reflecting your views and other people's views as well. And that's sort of where we are. But it's trying to find a way. Essentially, the best way of addressing this is to be able to open the economy and start to be able to trade again and grow again. But I know that's obviously going to take time. I know that's not going to be satisfactory for a number of people who are falling between the cracks. So I don't take that lightly. But ultimately, that's the one that is going to solve this long term.
Well, thanks, Minister. And it is great to have a minister who's run businesses before, and actually, what you're saying there about people aren't taking dividends out because it's some kind of tax dodge. In fact, as we all know, since they've put up the tax on dividends, there's very little tax advantage to it anyway.
Exactly.
Yet that view, it feels as if that view permeates somewhat. And you're right, Mel Stride, when I gave evidence to the Treasury Select Committee on this topic about a month ago, he put it to me that perhaps there's that view out there that people who work for their own companies pay themselves dividends. It's all a bit tax efficient, shall we say, and therefore they're sort of being deliberately excluded from the schemes and the help that has been set up. But you're saying that that's definitely not the case.
That's not the case. That's not the case. I mean, it has been commented on that people don't, necessarily pay the same tax as self-employed or PAYE. But there's no sense that is the case, that there's a principle that's been set as a result of that. Look, I'm really aware of the campaigns that are going on, the Forgotten campaigns, and all of the directors that are raising this, and I can understand why. I can understand that when you are seeing what's going on, and I think we do have one of the most generous, flexible schemes in the world, and it's been largely taken on as a really positive thing from the businesses and the business representative groups that I've seen. But at the end of the day, when you have big schemes that are, as I say, dealt with at such scale, at such speed, as Mel Stride himself said quite early on, there's always going to be hard edges, and so we're having to point people towards some of the other things, whether it's the bounce back loans, which I know people are going to be reticent about taking loans when they're seeing other people, but there are the bounce back loans. There are other areas here that people can go to. But ultimately, as I say, if we can't find a solution for this, the best way of getting through this is to do what we're doing, which is try and open up the economy, trying to break the brutally effective message of stay at home to save lives, because that's been the slogan, but the message actually is do work, unless you're in one of those businesses that are forced to close. Now, clearly there are personal services companies and other consultants that are around those businesses that they themselves can stay open, but because they service businesses that are required to close, again, then their trade has dried up. I totally understand that. So it's trying to, I suppose, working in tandem. We can't keep we're not nationalising the economy. We can't keep the support going on forever. So we do need to taper that off as the economy comes back to speed. So we're working in two streams, really, protecting what we can now, but also trying to open up the economy, go through the gears, so that go through that new normal, because social distancing is going to be with us for some time, and then hopefully be able to get to a point when we are in a position to bounce back from this.
Thanks. Just before we get off the sort of job retention scheme, there is one technical area, Ryan, where I think we've had quite a few questions from people on it, and I thought it might be interesting to sort of take the Minister's view on that.
Well, I mean, there's a few things you mentioned there, Minister, actually. I guess the RTI event, which you yourself have experienced with, there's a lot of people who are concerned because their RTI event comes after the 19th of March, and we've had a lot of questions about that, and indeed a lot of people today are asking about it. And there's also in the job retention scheme, obviously, can be available for directors who do pay some PAYE. And there are a lot of people today who are concerned because it doesn't seem to be too much flexibility, at least at the moment, from government allowing people to work to keep. Obviously, if you're running a business, keeping some of that activity going is necessary. It's quite a grey area. So some clarification around that.
So on that RTI event, lots of people pay. I didn't really know this until this happened. But it turns out lots of people pay their salary in one lump sum, and they do it right at the end of the tax year, and their accountant says, oh, we better pay you your salary allowance. And therefore they miss out because you had to have put it through RTI before the 19th of March. This is, I'm absolutely certain that this was not a deliberate thing by government when they set this up. Is there any chance that that date could be moved back to so that people who want to make use of that scheme can do for their salary element?
I think you come back to those hard edges again, and delivering something at pace and scale. You're right. For an employee to be eligible, they've got to have notified HMRC, but by on or before the 19th of March. Those paid annually are eligible to claim, as you say. Now, that's something that never occurred to me when I was running businesses. Didn't know that was really available at that time. But as long as they meet the relevant conditions, including being notified to HMRC on that day or before that date, and it relates to a payment of earnings in the 2019 to 2020 tax year. But if you paid annually and you're notified after that date, as you say, you're not going to be eligible for the scheme. It puts them in the same position as those who paid more frequently and weren't notified to HMRC on or before that as well. Basically, the Treasury's taken a view that the 19th, because with the HMRC checks and how the system works in terms of the back office checks, if you like, the 19th of March allows as many people as possible to be included by going right up to the date before the announcement. So it balances the risk of fraud that exists as soon as the scheme became public. We have already been flexible in that scheme once before in terms of allowing a couple of 100,000 more people onto there, but you do have to fix that date at some point, and the 19th of March was the date that seemed, because it was when everything went public.
Okay, and then
I know it's not satisfactory. I know it's that is still going to allow people to fall between the cracks. I understand the concern that people have, but again, as I say, these large schemes, you have to set the benchmark somewhere.
And also the furlough rules, which Ryan referred to. This is difficult because if you're the only, it works okay, we hope, for employers when they furlough one employee. The company can continue, the business continues, it can still generate income, and it can still try to set itself up for the future. We hope not too far away when the economy bounces back. But if you're the only person in the company and you furlough yourself, and then there are these strict rules around, you can't even communicate with your clients, let them know, look, I've furloughed myself, but I'll be back later. All of that begins to be, it's not clear that you're able to do that. Is there any scope for bringing more flexibility into those furlough rules for company directors that do want to make use of the JRS?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're looking at now. So you'll see in the next few days the rules for the next stage of furlough to start coming out, and that will be very much as you say, because your directors are able at the moment to furlough themselves to do their statutory duties to keep the company going. But as you say, they're not able to do anything that contributes to revenue raising for that company. But as part of the wider changes that we're making for the next stage as we move into economic recovery, what we're now doing is looking to introduce more flexible furlough scheme, because people will need to go back to work, not just for the reasons that you said for sole directors, but if you're preparing in readiness for retail, for leisure, for hospitality, all these kind of things. You can't just suddenly open up the shop doors and expect everything to be there. And similarly, you can't do that for a restaurant. So there are changes afoot that will start in July as we run through to October, sorry, where we've extended the furlough scheme to. But those details will be released any day now.
Okay, thanks very much. So I've got to ask you about the dreaded IR35. Now I know that this is a Treasury HMRC issue. It's not a BEIS issue, but many IPSE members are very concerned about this. The plan changes, which were due, of course, to come in this April, they were delayed because of the coronavirus. The government intends to put them into this finance bill to sort of lock them in place for 2021. But we've also had in recent weeks a report from a House of Lords committee chaired by Lord Forsyth, which was highly critical of the policy. and of the government's intention to do this now, because we don't really know where the economy is going to be. And we know that this is burdensome on business, and the government recognise that. That's why they delayed it at this time, we assume. So is it right for the government to lock those changes in now when we don't know where the economy will be and how ready business will be for it? And do we not want actually a really flexible labour market to help us get out of this economy? And IR35 restricts that, does it not?
So the government has undertaken to respond to those reports within a couple of months of their publication. So the response will be out shortly. You're right, they delayed the reform to April 2021, so they're going to give it an extra year onto that, so that you're not having to implement it any changes at this moment in time. And I know in the lead up to that, was forget being a minister, all backbench MPs had concerns from constituents in that situation, given the circumstances that we're in. There is a sense that and evidence that non-compliance of the off-payroll working rules is quite widespread, and the Exchequer's estimated that it's going to cost over £1.3 billion by 2023-24 if they don't address it. So that's not sustainable. It's denying the taxpayer significant revenue. I understand, again, the concerns that the people are coming in with adhering to the rules, but the government does remain committed to introducing the policy. So with people working like employees through their own limited company, pay broadly the same tax as those who are employed directly. We have an unusual situation. I'm not sure if it's in this country or in any other country, but certainly from my part of the business world, from the labour markets, the workers' rights, if you like, there are 3 types of workers, but 2 tax regimes. So Treasury treats as employed or self-employed, whereas in terms of workers' rights and these kind of things, there's employed people, there's self-employed people, and there are workers. So the gig economy and the more flexible things. So there are a lot of unusual circumstances that we need to work through.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is, I mean, I'm not going to, this is my one more point on this IR35 thing, is that these rules are kind of universally despised. No one likes them, and literally nobody understands them. I mean, I've been working around IR35 for 10 years, and I like to think that I know pretty much as much as most people about IR35, but I don't know everything, because you can disagree on it. 2 experts could look at the same set of circumstances and come to a different view on IR35. I appreciate that if everyone were to incorporate, that might leave a bit of a hole in the public finances, because there's no employer's NI. The tax that the individuals pay, employees or self-employed or company director, isn't that different. It's the employer's NI. That's the chunk of change which the revenue misses out on when someone incorporates or goes self-employed. But these rules are so complicated to look at that I don't think that they're going to work. They're just going to cause mass confusion. Would it not be better to take this opportunity to look at the tax system and say, is there an IPSE has responded to endless consultations on this, and we've put forward different suggestions and alternative ideas, and we largely get ignored. I mean, is the government listening to groups like IPSE when we put forward ideas which are research backed? We're trying to say that we're trying to help you with this, but they just insist on this dreaded IR35, which everyone hates.
No, look, I understand your concern about IR35, and yes, IPSE is very much heard. This is, why I was keen to come onto your webinar when you invited me. It's an organisation I've done work with a few years back when I was backbench MP, and continue to do so. So yes, we will listen, and it's a matter of trying to get the balance right. At the end of the day, we do have an incredibly complicated tax system. From a personal point of view, I've always been someone that likes a simplified tax system. That means that you don't have to have scores of accountants to actually wade your way through a big tax code, and you can concentrate on other things instead. But we have what we have, and so therefore, I think the Treasury has to take a view. And which they have done based on the consultation. As I say, they'll publish their response ASAP, as I say, within a couple of months they were committed to. And not everyone is going to be happy with the decision either way. But as I say, they'll take a view, but they will keep on listening.
Well, thanks very much for that. Okay, I was going to talk about the SAYS scheme now. Self-employed income support scheme. So this is the one that's targeted at what we call sole traders. So not the incorporated company directors, but people who are self-employed without an incorporated structure around them. IPSE actually was involved in the negotiations directly with the Chancellor in setting up this scheme. And so once again, I have to say, you know, well done to HMRC, and thank you to the Chancellor for setting it up, and well done to HMRC for getting this thing set up and delivered. And I've been through the process with some people that I know who are sole traders, and you can't fault it for ease, actually. You know, yeah, it's a very simple process. You go online, and by the way, anyone out there who hasn't yet done this, but if you're a sole trader, Google claim a grant under the self-employed scheme and see if you're eligible. It's a very simple check. You need your unique taxpayer reference code, your NI number, and just see if you're eligible, because there's quite a few people out there who are eligible that haven't yet claimed, according to a tweet I saw this morning from Paul Lewis on Moneybox. Anyway, there's still no word on whether the SAYS scheme will be extended. This was another thing which was raised yesterday by Darren Jones at the liaison committee. And I think my tweeted response to the Prime Minister's reply on that one was that it was worryingly non-committal. Do you have any news on the future of the SAYS scheme, or can you provide us with any sort of insights into whether it's likely to be extended into next month and beyond, as the job retention scheme has been?
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't. I don't know. Not been part of those conversations. I know clearly, you know, the SAYS scheme, as you say, on the whole, has gone down well, and it is a system where it works as a sort of grant rather than the job retention scheme, because you can actually still be working with the SAYS scheme, unlike the job retention scheme when you're actually putting yourself under furlough. That's not the case in this. But I can't give you any further information. What I am, what I do know, is the Treasury are looking at the ongoing support as a whole, as we clearly move to that next period, really. So whereas I think there are some schemes being extended, but they're also being extended and reviewed in terms of how they work, because clearly we need to make sure that in the job retention scheme, that kind of things, we're getting employers to contribute a little bit more, because we've got to make it right for the UK PLC, for taxpayers, as it were, that are contributing to this. We've got to make it sustainable. But clearly we want to keep self-employed people going, because they are the backbone of our economy. You know, self-employed small businesses. That is my world. That's where I've come from, and I do appreciate the contribution they make.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are. I mean, it's being reported today. I'm not expecting you to comment on this, but we're expecting a statement on this early next week. I think, Ryan, you'd seen this reported earlier, hadn't you, from the Chancellor about the future.
Yeah. In the Telegraph in the coming days, but we're hoping to hear about the furlough scheme today, I think. So I think maybe. Yeah. So maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
Could even be this afternoon.
I mean, lots of people. I mean, lots of you have emailed us about this issue, and you know, we are trying to find answers for you as well. You know, as I say, the Prime Minister was pretty non-committal in the liaison committee yesterday. So you know, there is no word from government at the moment. We wrote to the Chancellor yesterday seeking clarity on this again, by the way. So we are keeping up pressure. I wonder though, Minister, if it were to be extended, is there scope to bring in some groups which have fallen foul of those hard edges that you were talking about? And we've already talked about company directors, so I'll leave that one for now. But particularly the newly self-employed, these are people who started trading since April 2019. They haven't therefore done a tax return for the year 18-19, which is the critical year for SAYS. But they could do a tax return for 19-20 now, because that tax year has clearly ended. And yet they still aren't in scope of the scheme. Would there be any scope to extending it or broadening it, you know, extending it in time, but also broadening it to allow those newly self-employed people to make use of it?
Well, I can only talk to you really about the thinking. What was the thinking within the current parameters of the SAYS scheme? And I think, again, it's those sort of hard edges that we were talking about, because we're trying to support as many people as possible. It was designed to use the information that HMRC already holds to make it deliverable quickly and to minimize the risk of fraud. And so it wasn't possible to then include people that began trading after the 2018 to 19 tax year in the scheme. It was a difficult decision. Clearly, it was a difficult decision to take, but it was for practical reasons. So self-employed income isn't reported monthly, unlike the majority of employees, but at the end of each tax year on that self-assessment tax return. So it means that the most reliable up-to-date records of self-employed income is from the 18 to 19 tax returns, which were due at the end of January 2020. So it's given that time to get in to the system. No, so yes, obviously you can be putting your tax return in now, but it still creates the opportunity for fraudulent activity on a side basis through returns when no trading activity has actually taken place, or through inflated profits and these kind of things. So if you had an individual, an organised criminal gang could file fake or misleading returns to claim grants, and then the government can't, basically has taken the view that it can't expose the tax system to that kind of risk. But clearly I know that within that, that risk, that overarching view that HMRC has taken, again, as you described, there will be people that won't have access to that scheme as a result of that. So, which is why there's the business support finder on gov.uk website, which will point them to other areas of support that they may be entitled to.
Yeah, I mean, go on, Ryan.
Sorry, because we actually had quite an interesting question come in yesterday, Andy, if you remember, about someone who would have been a sole trader for the last 2 tax years before this one, but then they incorporated after April last year, and we were wondering whether or not there could be scope for bringing, because I imagine there's probably a fair amount of people who have done something similar, and if there could be some wiggle room around those as well.
Yeah, so I think in that question, it was interesting. This minister was a person who was a sole trader and did a tax return as a sole trader in 1819, but has since incorporated, and they feel they could claim the grant, but they're nervous. They're not sure whether they're allowed to, because there's a question that, are you still trading? Well, the answer is yes, they are still trading, but they're now trading through a limited company. I don't know if you, I don't want to put you on the spot with a difficult technical question.
Yeah, I don't know, I genuinely don't know the answers to that. I mean, because you're right, actually, that is one of the things, I mean, they're obviously being legitimate about it, but that is one of the complications that I was talking about, the unintended consequences, because clearly, as you say, if you put your application in on that basis, you've got a tax return to justify it. So, on first level, it would be, they would get it. The checks would be there. They'd presumably get their money. But from their moral standpoint and their own worry, as you said, which is why they're
the worry it could be clawed back later.
Yeah, exactly. And a number of these schemes do have that proviso that can be clawed back if they're fraudulent or misleading activity. So I can understand their concern. I genuinely don't know the answer, but I'm happy to follow that up. And
I mean, oh, that'd be great. Thank you. That would be really interesting. I mean, I think, having read around all this stuff so much in the guidance and everything, it doesn't say anywhere, well, if you're now operating for a limited company, you can't claim it. So I probably would claim it myself, but I don't want to give someone advice that might get them into trouble. That's
the problem. But no, I'm happy to take that away and see what I can find.
Thank you, Minister. Brilliant. Now, we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but when the Chancellor set up the SAVE scheme and announced it in the press conference, he said that he would have to look at the tax system, particularly around national insurance contributions that sole traders pay. He's probably referring to what we call what is class 4 NI contributions there, and looking at putting the rate up of that. Now, this is something that the former Chancellor Philip Hammond tried to do a few years ago, and then had to do a sort of U-turn on it, made quite a big splash in the papers. The idea being, look, if we're going to do this self-employment support scheme and hand out this grant money, then as a quid pro quo, we're going to put your tax up. Is it right to sort of build in long-term structural changes to the tax system, or at least to the tax rates, on the back of what is a temporary kind of emergency package in times of crisis. What are your views on that? Is it right that we might look to change the tax as a response to SAYS?
I'm not sure it'd be as a response to SAYS per se. I think that would be contribute to the debate and discussion around around this. And as you say, it has been something that's been going around and raging for some time now, for the reasons that you said. I think it sometimes does become harder for some to justify the inconsistency for the reasons that I was saying. The difference between the worker types and the three worker types and the two the way they're taxed, it doesn't really sit comfortably. None of that sits particularly comfortably in a modern age with the changing economy. So it probably is time at some point to look at the whole gamut again, really, in many ways. But the gap between benefits between self-employed and those in employment has closed significantly from probably my day when I was starting out in that process as self-employed, being able to access the same more generous new state pension as employees can, and those kind of things. So I think it's it will be time to reconsider it. What happens with that? That's an issue of debate and up to the chance.
Do you think that there is perhaps? Do you think that maybe it feels as if there could be an opportunity to look at that kind of thing on the back of this crisis once we're back up and running, and we're looking to reset the economy in so many ways, and actually say this area of taxation around self-employment, the employment self-employment boundary, as you quite rightly say, this confusion about which tax bracket the worker status sits within, because actually no one's quite sure about that either if you talk to the experts. And the fact that we don't have a legal definition of self-employment at the moment, and the problems that causes with views around, is this disguised self-employment or is it false or forced self-employment? And all of those issues which relate to tax but aren't only about tax. Is there an opportunity, and we've sort of had it before with the Matthew Taylor report and then the government's Good Work programme, in which they commit to doing all those things, but haven't done some of them already, but lots of them, particularly around employment status, haven't really been grappled with yet. Is there a chance, you think, to really look at this and perhaps solve the IR35 issue at the same time?
Well, I think looking at it in the round is, I think, the better conversation to have than, as you say, do we just shut up this tax or take away that bit or these kind of things? Because what that does, in the same way as the Good Work Guide and some of the court cases around workers and what have you, it gives people a sense of certainty. Where there is confusion, you were describing yourself about how some of these schemes just not really understood. You get two experts to argue the toss between them, you get different opinions. You want to have the clearer you can make the work categories, the tax categories, so you know what you are giving up if you're going down one route, or what you're gaining if you're going down another. Allows people clearer choices. That allows more certainty, presumably therefore for the Treasury, in terms of they can work out what their tax take is going to be a lot clearer on that way. There's less scope for tax avoidance, so that debate is restricted because there's less of it. So from my point of view, I think just having a wider discussion about workers' rights and rights, benefits, and tax, and therefore class would be the sensible debate to have.
And do you quickly, I'm going to say quickly, it's quite a difficult question actually, but there is a view some people take that the worker category, which sits sort of in between employment and self-employment, is unhelpful, and we could do with getting rid of it to simplify our system. And others say, no, it's actually really necessary. And for example, it would be quite hard to run a bar at a festival without that worker status, because you can't really employ those people, but they're not really self-employed either. Do you have a view on that? Is the worker status something which is useful, or is it a confusing thing?
Well, I think it's something that's more prevalent now because of the changing economy, and this is what that Good Work piece was all about for Matthew Taylor. I haven't come out with a firm conclusion yet, because I'm all for simplicity for the reasons that I said, both in terms of worker class and taxation. But on the other hand, what people do like in this day and age is the sense of, you know, with more portfolio careers, with the able to sort of have a few hours here, a few hours there, with second jobs, third jobs, and what have you. You know, 0 hours is often demonized in the media, but the flexibility is appreciated by many within the vast majority, frankly, that are working those hours. So it is complex because we're not living that simplified life that maybe we were 30 years ago, when you couldn't even transfer your pension from one business to one work job to another, never mind your hours from one business to another in a single day, those kind of things. So it is complex. I don't have a firm view, but I'll be really interested to start the debate. We're putting through the Employment Act as part of our manifesto commitment, which actually does look at flexible working. It almost makes what it's looking at making flexible working the default option. So that's actually more likely to feed into the complexities of people's lives and lifestyle choices.
Thanks. I mean, it's a really interesting area, isn't it? And I'm not expecting, you know, you or anyone else to have, you know, all the answers on this one. It's a really difficult area. You know, I think IPSE's view is that we should be probably encouraging people to work in the way that they want to work and build the systems which can cope, whether that's taxation or rights, which are appropriate to that. But of course, that gets very complicated very fast. So it's give and take on both sides. And as always, there's that tension between simplicity and kind of flexibility and dynamism and fairness as well. So yeah, it's a difficult balance to get right. Now, all the evidence points to this being a major economic shock. The coronavirus it's shut down businesses. We can see it on the high street. We know that, you know, there's going to be, you know, off the scale kind of, you know, reductions in GDP, and all the relevant sort of touchstones are going to be saying this is very, very bad times. When we do get back to perhaps getting this thing behind us, hopefully soon, what are the levers that government can pull to get the economy firing again? And I'm thinking of, you know, there's some debate over, should taxes go up? Should they come down? Should we do more borrowing? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're in such unprecedented, I keep using the word unprecedented, use an unprecedented amount of times the word unprecedented, it's extraordinary. But we are in just, you know, really, really times when we're having to work on real time in government. I mean, you know, from self-employed people in particular, and small businesses, they make decisions on a day-to-day basis. Government tends to make decisions on a monthly and year basis, and further. We're having to actually concertina everything in. If you think where we were, it was only a couple of months ago, 2-3 months ago, a relatively sense of normal, looking forward to a nice summer. But now, as you say, businesses have closed down. We've gone through several iterations of our support scheme. We're now going through all of the safer workplace guidance to get people and give people the confidence to come back. So first of all, I think we're looking in terms of the economic recovery has to coincide with the health recovery. You saw the test and trace announcement yesterday, which is basically effectively giving people some of their freedoms back, to be able to get out of their homes, go back to work, travel around, see people. But with the proviso that we can only do that if we work together and respect the rules in terms of social isolation. If you are contacted by one of the tracers from having gone and started, had contact with someone for the length of time who has COVID-19 symptoms. So that's going to be difficult. It's going to be here for months to come, the economic event that you're talking about. And so we have to have a sense of economic recovery. We have to have a plan there. We're starting that by getting businesses back to work staging, a staged event with hospitality in the necessity being delayed, because it's anywhere where people are congregating. With that comes the infrastructure around it, schools, transport, these kind of things. We've talked about levelling up. We're going to continue to invest in infrastructure, not least digital infrastructure, because with more people working from home, the need has become more apparent to have good broadband, to make sure that we can continue to use Zoom, Teams, go to webinars, and all these kind of other software that we can do. We need to be able to showcase our businesses as well. As small companies, retailers as they open, hospitality, to again give customers the confidence that they need to go out, that they can go out safely, they can and they can spend their money. But we will grow our way out of this. There's no sense. I've seen of anybody talking about austerity 2.0, apart from a few bobs in the media. But we do need to make sure that we can grow our way out of this economy, and that will be working with businesses to see what regulations we can continue to ease, as we have done over the last few months, and make sure that we can invest in the future rather than necessarily have a punitive few years to come.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, for your time. I think we've gone over your time, the time you've given us. So thank you very much for joining us for this webinar this afternoon. Paul Scully, Small Business Minister, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Ryan and I will just stay on the line now to answer any more of your questions that we've seen coming in. And but first of all, Ryan, I thought I'd just get your view on what you heard there from the Minister, as you were sort of like an observer for a bit of that. What did you think of that? Anything stand out from what he said?
So, and obviously I'm trying to monitor the questions as much as possible as well. And firstly, can I say, you know, I think this, out of all the webinars we've had, and I think it's something like our 12th, I reckon in terms of questions, this might be the highest number we've had both during and before. So we haven't been able to answer absolutely everything. I thought there were some good notes around having that debate in the future about employment status, and he was very good on things like workers' rights and the acknowledgement that there was abuse of self-employment categories and the worker category at the lower end. However, not so much with the IR35 higher end. I mean, we probably could have had 4 hours of talking to him about some of that sort of stuff that came up earlier in the podcast, in the webinar. Podcast, I'm getting ahead of myself. But you know, that little bit at the end about austerity was quite interesting, I think, considering some of the what's coming out of you know, in the press at the moment. There was that bit leaked to the Telegraph, I think, about the Treasury's intentions for spending. However, I'm not entirely sure. I think I was probably expecting a little bit more on what limited companies could do, and the RTI event maybe as well. It's a shame we don't have time to talk about umbrella companies.
So I thought that, you know, he was pretty. He didn't want to entertain the idea that date of the 19th of March could be moved. He sort of said, look, HMRC had to set a date at some time, something fraud, and therefore that was the date that was set. It was already pushed back once, which is true. It was going to be an earlier date, and I'm not holding out much hope for that being moved back, unfortunately. But I do wonder whether something more might be looked at for company directors, particularly more in light of what the Prime Minister said yesterday at the liaison committee. But I have to say, on balance, I think that the government is looking actually to sort of wind up some of these schemes, or begin to do so, rather than expand them. So I don't want to get anyone's hopes up there.
I think he's.
Were there any questions that have come in? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying, I thought he seemed quite receptive to the issue around working whilst furloughed. I mean, and we know, you know, company directors that are furloughing, you're not going to get a huge amount of money out at the moment, but hopefully it's enough. But and you know, if you can claim it, you should. But he did seem quite receptive to that point, that there are grey areas around that. I would love to ask him about umbrella companies, but we don't have time. And that's another area around sort of PAYE, and quite a grey area of concern. We've had a lot of questions about the RTI event come through, and what limited companies.
In fact, before the webinar too, we had so many coming in. Lots of you are in that group of people who make one annual payment, do it after the 19th of March, and are therefore excluded from the job retention scheme. And yeah, we did ask the Minister about that, and as I say, don't think that there was very much to sort of hang our hat on there in terms of, yeah, he's going to take that away, and you know, they're going to look at it and change that, I'm afraid.
There was also, and again, it came up a lot in the questions, and I think it would have been nice if the Minister acknowledged issues around employment rights, but when he was talking about the equalisation of tax and what could happen next, as of someone who's worked, you know, has run businesses himself, maybe would have been nice to hear from him that you know, company directors and people that run small businesses they already carry risks. They don't get as many employment rights around sick pay and those sorts of things, and that should be acknowledged in the tax system, as IPSE's always said. So I was expecting him to maybe be slightly more positive in that respect.
Well, look, what he did say is, and I do believe, because I've spoken to Paul before a couple of times, you know, he, as he alluded to, he has run businesses before, and he understands that a lot of company directors pay themselves dividends, not because it's some sort of tax benefit to them, but because you don't know how much money your business is going to earn. So you pay yourself the minimum in salary, and then you take out dividends as and when you can afford to do so. It's a perfectly legal and perfectly sensible way to pay yourself if you're a company director. I mean, look, we did push him on this whole thing around the dividends in the job retention scheme. Could they not be thought through in some way? You know, he's not a Treasury Minister, so he can't really, you know, answer those questions. What we do know is he has gone out into the world in the last few weeks and said, what are the ideas that give me some ideas that I can take to the Treasury? So, and we have given him those ideas, and he has taken them to the Treasury. So, you know, I think that he personally is on the side of business because he's been in business himself. He is a sort of an old school conservative party, a small business kind of person. I genuinely believe, and I actually, you know, do think he's one of our better small business ministers. The problem is that these decisions that we're talking around tax, IR35, all those things which really impact people, they're all made in Treasury. It's a different department, and yes, he can talk to them, but he's not inside. He's not really in the tent when it comes to those big decisions being made, I think. I was also going to ask him, if I'd had the chance, about working from home, and if you can't work from home, you're supposed to go back to work, but you're not supposed to take public transport. Whether those ideas conflict with one another, whether those messages are conflicting with one another. I think there's a lot of confusion out there around that. He himself did say at one stage, well, the message isn't really stay at home, it's actually go to work. Didn't he say that? I felt like that's what he said.
Yeah, no, he did. Well, he said it is stay at home, but if you could, yeah, it was all, yeah, there was that bit, wasn't there? He sort of, he managed to skip the stay alert bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, anyway, look, we're probably going to end it here then. So thank you so much to everyone who's joined us today. We've had really good numbers to join us. We've had lots of questions coming in. We haven't had a chance to answer them all, but we hope that in the questions that we have asked, we have addressed a lot of those areas that so many of you were writing into us about. We will update our FAQ page on our website so that we always look at all the questions afterwards as well. And if there's any in there, that we will then put that into our FAQ page. We will keep on providing the information, so keep checking our website on our coronavirus pages around where you can find government support. And just one thing I would also like to mention is that we have National Freelancers Day coming up on the 18th of June. You can go onto IPSE's website, register for that. You will be sent the links that you can see now. You will be sent in an email within the next 24 hours, and you'll also be sent a link to National Freelancers Day, where you can hear much more talk around the type of things we've been discussing today, and more, much more practical tips around what you can do to help you in your business, how you can build your profile, all sorts of things. So, you know, really good schedule of events there, NFD 18th of June. And that's it, really. So thanks very much for joining us. And yeah, we will be back next week. Bye.
Guys.